At this time, the Earth is in the year of a technological explosion. AI technology has made revolutionary breakthroughs. Today's robots, whether in appearance or intelligence, are mostly not much different from humans. They have even evolved the ability to think independently. At certain times, they may climb onto their owner's bed voluntarily, seeming completely integrated into human life. But as social demands change, what fate awaits them? When the IQ of robots reaches 180, what terrifying disasters await humanity? The story takes place in a secret base on the outskirts of Japan. AI engineer George is facing a severe challenge. The company asks him to develop a high IQ robot within 3 years. This task weighs heavily on him like a mountain. 2.5 years have passed, but George's results are not ideal. He has only developed 2 types of robots. The first robot is large and clumsy, with intelligence levels similar to that of a 5-year-old child. In contrast, the second robot is much lighter, and has an IQ comparable to that of a 15 or 16-year-old child. Although it is still far from the company's requirements, the second robot can think independently, and possesses basic analytical abilities. George keeps this matter secret from the company. No one knows about the existence of the second robot, because he knows that once the company learns of the second robot's existence, it will surely be taken for various studies. This is not what George wants to see. During his spare time at work, George chats with his wife Julie using an old box-like device. In such a technologically advanced time, this device seems out of place. Julie and George have been apart for more than 2 years. She has long tired of living without her partner by her side. On this afternoon, his boss Mike initiates a video conference. Not only does he inquire about the progress of the work, but he also emphasizes security issues at the base, saying that the system has been frequently malfunctioning lately. The base stores important company secrets. Once leaked, the consequences would be unimaginable. To be safe, Mike has already arranged for an armed response team to come. Upon hearing this, George immediately senses a crisis. After hanging up the phone, he rushes to his workspace. It turns out he has been working tirelessly on the development of the 3rd-generation robot. This is the robot referred to as number 3. Both in appearance and intelligence, it is much closer to that of an adult. However, it still needs some time to be fully perfected. In order to reassure Mike, George needs to quickly resolve the system malfunctions. What is puzzling is why George, as a company researcher, would hide his research results. The next day, George takes number 2 out to work. Along the way, number 2 appears listless. It turns out it sensed that George was developing number 3, knowing that number 3 would surely be superior to it. Although George reassures it several times that he won't abandon it even if number 3 is created. That night, George faces the most crucial step. He attempts for the first time to implant the consciousness chip into number 3's brain. This is a critical operation that determines whether number 3 can succeed. Unexpectedly, as soon as he places the chip inside, number 3 crashes immediately due to an overload of information. George has to cut off the power to reduce the damage it receives. The next morning, George discovers a puppy running into the base. Upon closer inspection, he finds that someone swapped the controller parts, which caused the security gates to remain open. In this base, there are only him and number 2. George immediately asks number 2, hoping it will tell the truth. He assures it that even if it was a prank, he wouldn't blame it, but number 2 looks innocent and insists that it didn't do it. Just as he says this, the system indicates that 2 vehicles are about to enter the base. The visitors are the manufacturers of the box-like device. It turns out that this device isn't a communication device at all. Instead, it is a consciousness storage unit. 2 years ago, George's wife, Julie, passed away in a car accident. Unable to accept this, he ordered this device, and completely stored his wife's consciousness inside it. Whenever he misses his wife, he talks to her through this device. But recently, George has noticed that his wife's signal has become increasingly unstable. It's okay when she contacts him first, but he often cannot reach her when he wants to. The manufacturer states that this is a sign of sleep disorder, then begin to check the original components of the device. The staff quickly discovers a major issue. The original safety seal on the device has been torn. According to the archival storage regulations, regardless of how the seal was broken, the device must be destroyed. If necessary, they may even resort to using force. Destroying the device would be equivalent to killing his wife. George absolutely won't agree to this. He warns the manufacturer that this is his company's territory. If they act recklessly, it would be equivalent to armed invasion. Surprisingly, this threat works. After careful consideration, the manufacturer refrains from taking rash action. Although this crisis has passed for now, it has certainly sounded an alarm for George. he must accelerate the research and development process. After a day of adaptation, number 3 no longer resists the outside world. However, its memory is completely blank. This is perfectly normal. After all, a completely new life has suddenly entered this world. It is bound to be filled with questions about everything around it. George gently reassures it, stating that the chip in its brain is working hard to integrate data. Soon, it will remember everything. As George speaks, he pulls back the curtains, hoping that the view outside will help calm number 3 down. In the following days, George stays by number 3's side, conducting various tests, and patiently teaches it about the world. All of this is watched by number 2. This morning, George goes out to check the equipment as usual. He used to take number 2 along, but today, he asks number 2 to stay behind and take care of number 3. Number 2 immediately feels disheartened. George always says he won't abandon it, but this arrangement feels no different from being replaced. While George is in the middle of his work, number 3 communicates via the intercom that the lights are continually flashing, urging him to hurry back. George suddenly has a bad feeling in his heart. The system has been malfunctioning frequently lately. Worried about an incident, George rushes back. After returning to the base, he checks the circuit board immediately, but finds no abnormalities. Perhaps the base is old, so George brushes it off as aging wiring. That evening, George receives a call from Mike. He learns that the company has sent a risk assessor who will also bring new safety protocols. George originally doesn't want to meet, but if he doesn't go, the assessor might come directly to the base. Then the secrets within the base would surely be exposed. With no choice, George has to attend the meeting. After meeting, the assessor shows George a photo. It is actually a picture of him while he was sleeping. It is clear that someone has been secretly monitoring him. The photo was sent anonymously to the assessor, so he also doesn't know who is behind this. To be on the safe side, the assessor hands George a briefcase, which contains the new safety protocols. He also warned him not to open it unless absolutely necessary. George is filled with confusion, but at this moment, he can only choose to trust the other party. On the way back, he can't help recalling the past with his wife. It turns out that 3 years ago, George spent countless days and nights researching. He finally succeeded in developing a deliverable AI prototype. The company was extremely pleased with his results, and decided to increase their investment, even specifically arranged a dedicated workspace for him. However, this studio was located far away in Yamanashi Prefecture, Japan. When his wife, Julie, heard the news, she congratulated him, but her eyes were filled with disappointment. She knew that this meant they would face a 3-year separation. However, before they could come up with a solution, a sudden car accident took Julie's life. Carrying these memories, George returns to the base, exhausted in mind and body. He quickly falls asleep, but in the middle of the night, a sharp, piercing alarm instantly jolts him awake from his dreams. George instinctively grabs his weapon quickly. He searches the base warily, and soon discovers the living room window has been broken. It is clear that someone has broken into the base. George carefully searches every corner, but he doesn't see a single suspicious figure. At this moment, he seems to suddenly realize something. His expression suddenly changes. He quickly rushes to the workspace. After checking, he finds that number 1 and number 2 robots are safe and sound, but number 3 is nowhere to be found. George instantly understands that the thief's target is the number 3 prototype. In George's eyes, the current situation is undoubtedly an emergency. He hurriedly takes out the briefcase the assessor had given him earlier. As the case opens, all the security doors of the base automatically lock down. At the same time, the image of the assessor appears on the case. The assessor hurriedly asks what has happened. George cannot let the other party know about number 3. After a moment of hesitation, he can only lie, claiming that he opened the case out of curiosity. The assessor doesn't probe further. He just seriously warns George that he must only open the case in a real emergency next time. He had nearly dispatched a rapid response team just now. Since he cannot seek help from the company, George decides to find number 3 himself. So he drives to the safe perimeter, and quickly launches a drone to search. George thinks that the intruder shouldn't have gotten far with number 3, however, after the drone patrols a wide area, it finds nothing. It doesn't even find any traces of vehicle movement. Just when he is filled with disappointment, he accidentally discovers something puzzling at the edge of a cliff. It is actually a pendant made from the model of number 2. Why would this item appear here? After returning to the base, George starts rummaging through his night work bag. He must find number 3 no matter what, but when he opens the top cabinet, number 3 unexpectedly falls out from inside. It immediately grabs George by the neck. In an agitated state, it expresses that it has understood everything. It questions George about why he has treated it this way. At this point, George feels there is no need to hide any longer. so he admits that he worked tirelessly to develop the robot, in order to find a suitable vessel for his wife's consciousness. His wife's consciousness exists in the form of a signal. George had previously attempted to copy it onto consciousness software. This is why he removed the seal on the device. Although this process took him a lot of time and effort, he is relieved that the final result was successful. Now, with personality templates, as long as a matching physical template is created, both can be merged. From number 1 to number 3, these robots are like continuously upgraded software versions, with performance becoming increasingly superior. George is absolutely convinced of this, and asserts that there will not be a number 4 robot born. These words deeply affect number 3, so it tells George about the events of that day. It turns out that number 2 brought it to the consciousness storage unit, and plainly states that it will become the vessel for George's wife's consciousness. Upon learning this, George is furious, and immediately finds number 2 to question its motives for doing this. Number 2 can only confess that it is jealous of number 3. It feels that George could have continued to conduct research on it. It also longs to escape from its current heavy shell. But for George, the consciousness storage unit belonging to his wife is an absolute bottom line that can't be touched. Even if number 2 repeatedly explains that there is no malice, George still unhesitatingly turns off its power. But the matter doesn't end there. George then removes number 2's mechanical legs. The purpose is to create a new pair of legs for number 3. After everything is prepared, George reshapes number 3's appearance. This time, number 3's size and appearance are indistinguishable from that of a real human. After completing this work, George then restarts number 2 robot. When the revived number 2 takes its first step, it notices something unusual about its legs. It's clear that George has put all his thoughts into number 3. What he made for itself is just a pair of crude legs. Number 2 understands what is going on in its heart. It doesn't expect number 3 to return the legs, but just hopes that George can make a new pair for it. However, George always finds various excuses to procrastinate. He just casually says he will help when he has time. Number 2 is filled with sadness but says nothing. It silently leaves the base and stands by the lake for a long time. No one knows what it is truly thinking, until its power is exhausted. It collapses in the hallway of the base. George is enjoying a meal with number 3. If it weren't for number 1's timely reminder, he would still be unaware of number 2's condition. After reconnecting the power, George doesn't comfort number 2, and just coldly tells it to calm down by itself. At this moment, number 2 feels as if it has fallen into an endless abyss of darkness. George always says he will not abandon it, but now, being treated this way feels no different from being abandoned. In the following days, George spends all his time with number 3. They listen to music and dance together, but those wonderful melodies sound like sharp blades to number 2, stabbing its heart time and again. Although number 2 is a robot, it has developed emotions through constant learning and experience. It is really hard for it to accept this feeling of abandonment. This morning, number 2 neatly places the model pendant that George gave it, then says goodbye to number 1. Afterwards, it walks towards the lake where it often gazes. With a heart full of regret and reluctance, it steps into the water. By the time George realizes it, the signal from number 2 has completely disappeared. He dispatches all the drones to search, but in the end, there is nothing to be found. With no other choice, George can only conclude that number 2 is dead. He buries number 2's remains, and hastily holds a simple funeral for it. After a few days of adjustment, number 3's system gradually improves. Since its consciousness is derived from George's wife's memories, images of moments spent with George often unconsciously resurface in its mind. One night, number 3 suddenly recalls the intimate moments with George, so it lies down next to George and instinctively holds him. George is startled by this sudden action, breaking into a cold sweat. He never thought he would have to accept the feelings of a robot, so he ruthlessly pushes number 3 away. Because of the memories, number 3 feels that it should be very close to George, but in reality, George is very repulsed by it. The huge contradiction between this reality and its perception causes number 3's system to fall into chaos. As a result, it falls into a coma. After what seems like an eternity, number 3 slowly awakens. At this moment, George has no time to pay attention to its emotional fluctuations. He is eager to try to transfer his wife's consciousness out. However, this attempt ends in failure. George hurriedly calls the records company. The other party conducts a remote diagnosis and states that George's wife's hypersomnia condition is becoming more severe. There may be an issue with the original device components. George mentions that someone from the company came to do a diagnosis not long ago. Although the seal was broken, the original components of the device were intact at that time. the person in charge informs George after some inquiry that the records company hasn't arranged any on-site visits recently. The two people George mentioned aren't employees of the company. George is instantly filled with confusion. Who could those two people be? Could it be that they tampered with his wife's storage unit? As George is consumed with worry, Mike's call suddenly comes in. The tone of the person on the other end is unprecedentedly stern. It turns out that the consciousness of number 2 robot is also based on George's wife's memories. The company, using remote positioning technology, discovers that the data which should have been securely stored in the device has appeared in the lake outside the base. Mike angrily accuses George of developing with no substantial results, and now making such a serious mistake. His current actions seriously infringe upon the rights of the company. Mike coldly informs George that he must stand by at his position. He will send someone immediately to shut down the laboratory. The rapid response team will arrive shortly. After hanging up, George is filled with anxiety. He knows that once the laboratory is closed, everything will be in vain. He doesn't have time to think and immediately rushes out towards the bridge that connects to the outside world. He grabs an axe and swings it forcefully at the bridge's switch. Sparks fly as the switch is damaged, making the bridge temporarily impassable. But just during George's brief absence from the base, his wife's video call suddenly comes through. Taking this opportunity, number 3 robot seems to be proclaiming sovereignty over Julie, continuously talking excitedly. At this moment, Julie's consciousness is becoming increasingly faint. Number 3 even arrogantly claims that once she completely dissipates, she will continue to take care of George in her place. Just at this moment, George rushes back. He happens to catch the scene. Furious, he rushes forward and snatches the phone away, and anxiously tries to make his wife believe him. He keeps saying that they will soon be reunited for real. However, George's words stab into number 3's heart like a sharp blade. Number 3 feels wronged and thinks that if it isn't good enough, it could completely become perfect through a reboot, just like a software upgrade. But at this moment, George's thoughts are entirely on his longing for his wife. What he wants is not a perfect robot, but for his wife to truly come back to his side. The two have a fierce argument. Suddenly, the sharp alarm of the base rings out. It turns out that the rapid response team has arrived. As the security doors slowly open under command, number 3's eyes gradually dim. It finally accepts this cruel fate. Deep down, it knows that it never had a chance in George's heart from the very beginning. Rather than waiting to die, it would be better to fulfill George's wish, so it quietly lays down on the experimental platform, deciding to transfer Julie's consciousness into its own brain, in an attempt to complete this special redemption. Meanwhile, the rapid response team is making every effort to breach the last security door. At this moment, number 3 is still lying quietly on the experimental platform. Not yet awake, George is filled with anxiety. He realizes that danger is imminent, so he tightly grips his weapon, preparing to fight to the death against the invading team. Finally, the last door slowly opens. George's nerves are on edge. However, the scene behind the door leaves him completely stunned. There is actually no one outside. He hurriedly looks outside the base. The helicopter that was originally parked in the open space has also vanished without a trace, as if it had never existed. George is filled with confusion. Before he can comprehend the situation, a slight noise comes from behind him. It turns out that number 3 has awakened. Its gaze meets George's. The expression in its eyes is obviously different from before. It instantly recognizes George. It seems that the consciousness transfer plan has succeeded. At this moment, the phone of the consciousness storage unit rings again, but Julie's consciousness has successfully transferred to number 3, who could be the one making the call. Filled with confusion and a hint of unease, George slowly picks up the phone. To his surprise, the voice on the other end is his wife's voice. His wife calmly tells George that this will be their last call. It turns out that it wasn't his wife who died in that car accident 3 years ago, but George himself. In order to extend his consciousness, Julie cooperated with the records company, carefully sealing George's consciousness in a storage unit. However, there is a crucial prerequisite to achieve this goal, which is that the deceased must never know the truth of their own passing. Therefore, the records company meticulously created this base scenario to make George mistakenly believe that he is still alive in a virtual world. However, this special system is about to expire, and George's signal is becoming increasingly weak. This time, the wife calls to bid him farewell. Saying this, Julie hands the microphone to their daughter beside her. It turns out that Julie was already pregnant at the time of the accident. She had been afraid to tell George this news, for fear that he might realize the truth because of it. Now that George's consciousness is about to dissipate, his wife hopes to leave him with fewer regrets. As the call comes to an end, George's image gradually blurs. It is only at this moment that George realizes he is the one who has been living in the storage unit all along. The film ends here. This film is a truly surprising movie, especially the shocking twist at the end. It instantly illuminates the entire story and leaves the audience in awe. Some people think that the twist at the film's conclusion feels a bit contrived. However, this is not the case. As long as we revisit the entire film with a discerning eye, we will find that many details have already hinted that all of this is George's experience after his death. At the beginning of the film, a gloomy and oppressive atmosphere spreads out. The secret base in the suburbs seems to be forever shrouded in a gray curtain. Sunlight has never penetrated inside. This oppressive ambience silently conveys the illusory nature of the world in which George resides. Moreover, the conversations between George and his wife pulse with deep sadness between the lines. It seems to have already suggested to the audience that they are eternally separated, yet no one ever expected that the one who had passed was actually George. The conversation issue that George reported to the staff also hides a mystery. When he actively calls his wife's number, there is only silence on the line, but when his wife calls, they can communicate normally. This seemingly unreasonable phenomenon has a logical explanation behind it. George's consciousness is sealed in the storage unit of the records company. Only when his wife personally visits the records company can the signal connect. This also explains why George often encounters failures when making phone calls. Clearly, the world in George's eyes, from the grass and trees of the base to the words and actions of the characters, is all preset. Of course, the conditions of the real world are also reflected in the film. George's consciousness storage unit is about to reach its expiration. This makes the entire system increasingly unstable. This instability is vividly manifested in the virtual world. The security doors often don't respond and cannot close properly. The lights flicker and jump from time to time. Even the risk assessors that appear later on are carefully designed characters to stabilize this virtual system. In addition to the mind-bending plot, the film's exploration of AI is also a major highlight. The consciousness of number 2 robot comes from George's wife's memories. However, due to technological limitations, it can only vaguely recall some fragments of time spent with George. It dreams of driving with George but can't remember the destination. Even so, these vague memories still create a dependency on George for number 2. It longs to have a place in George's life, to realize its own value of existence. This film, through such a sci-fi story, successfully presents a profound question to the audience. If in the future, AI technology really develops to the point where robots can possess human-like consciousness and emotions, how should we define and treat such new living beings? This is a question worth exploring deeply. It is a work that deserves careful consideration and analysis. Interested friends can watch the original film archive. If you enjoy my channel, please subscribe to it.